Social Music Talk. With me today is Howie Klein, former president of Reprise Records back in its heyday. And Howie has been involved with so many different trends in music, trends that became part of the continuum of rock and roll that still exists today. Howie, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Alex.
We go way back. While you were, running Reprise Records back in the 90s, I was programming Quad 106.5 in Sacramento, the alternative station. And Jim Bergen was our Warner rep then. And he was the only guy from the music industry who lived in Sacramento. So that made me feel special that, wow, someone from Warner Brothers lives in Sacramento. It was just amazing. Then I met you around 96, I think. I believe in LA. It might have been a Rick Carroll fundraiser thing through Mike Jacobs. But I remember that's when I met you. And then after that, I just started following you this century on your blog, your political activist blog, downwithtyranny.com. So it's just fun to talk with you. I know you kind of have mixed politics and music in your career. Can you briefly explain how those two things overlap, music and politics?
How they overlap for me in my career, you mean?
Yeah, in your career.
Okay. So the first time I got involved with politics in my career was when I was elected freshman class president at Stony Brook, the college I went to.
Long Island.
And I had to book a band to play the freshman class dance. And I picked a very, very controversial political band called the Fugs, F-U-G-S. So I booked them to play, and the space was about something that could hold 200 or 300 people, and about 1,000 people showed up. And everybody was packed in and no one could get in or out. And the captain of the basketball team, who was like sort of the opposite of me, a guy named Bob O'Connor, came over to me and started screaming it right in my face, like this close. And I was, as he was screaming, I wasn't really paying close attention to what was coming out of his mouth, but I saw he had like a vein inside of his neck that was like pulsing. And I kept thinking, wow, it's amazing that music can do this to somebody and make them like so emotional and freaked out. And it was a largely Democratic campus, and he was a largely Republican asshole. And he was complaining that his girlfriend couldn't get out of this place, and she was offended by all of the curse words that the Fugs were using.
Yeah, like female body parts, maybe.
Yeah, well, lots of everything you could think of. They were a pretty raucous band. In any case, that was my first time of mixing politics and music together. I then was appointed by the student government for the next year, the chairman of the Student Activities Board. And as the chairman of the Student Activities Board, it was my job to put on concerts, lots and lots of them. And, whether they were very, very big ones in the gym, which was our biggest facility, or small ones in student lounges, and also to have a speakers program. And, I made that stuff very, very, very political, everything. So I looked for, bands that were more political, usually cutting edge bands that people hadn't heard of. So just as an example, no one knew who the Doors were. When I booked them, they didn't have an album.
Right. And 67, they came on the scene.
Right. So I became friends with them when they were mixing their record. At the same time they were mixing in New York, they were like the house band at this tiny club about as big as my living room. See the living room behind me? The club is about that big. Under the 59th Street Bridge. I think it was called Ondine, maybe. Yeah, I think it was called Ondine. And they played every night, and I went every night. And I became good friends with them, mostly because I had drugs that they wanted and couldn't get otherwise. And so we bonded. I asked them if they would play my school. They said yes. And in between the time of us agreeing on that, which included a $400 fee, the record came out, but they weren't really still that well known, and the students didn't know them. They came because the record was on the radio, and I remember, I was like sort of drugged out of my mind, and I was standing in front of the stage and like really, really into it, like really like completely absorbed in the music. And at one time, Morrison does this like very dramatic pause that goes on for about a minute. So there's nothing for a minute. And at that moment, I feel someone shaking me. And it's this guy, Steve Krantz, who is the sophomore class president or representative or something. He's shaking me. He's screaming, "Klein, did you pay these clowns yet?" Like, what? And I was like really high. Anyway, yeah, so people didn't really know these bands and didn't appreciate them. I had Tim Buckley, who I had met at a concert, open the show. I met him at a Velvet Underground concert and asked him if he'd come out and play, and he did.
Mm-hmm.
And
did you promote Velvet Underground?
We never had them on the campus. I don't know why, because I would see them all the time. I mean, they did this thing on St. Mark's Place called the Dom, and they did. But when the Dom would become Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable every weekend. And I went every weekend. I never missed a show. I saw every single one of them. I was just like completely fascinated, not just with the Velvets, who I completely loved, and later became very, very close friends with Lou, but also with everybody who was hanging out there. Like every band in New York and every band that would come to New York, every musician would come to these shows. I would meet people there and bring them back to Stony Brook to play, like Jackson Browne, for example.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, in Jackson's case, he wound up spending the best part of a semester there on the campus. And in fact, we even got him briefly to become the lead singer of this band, Soft White Underbelly, which became the Blue Oyster Cult.
Yeah.
That didn't last very long, but he was the lead singer for a couple of minutes.
Wow. Didn't you promote Jimi Hendrix at that time?
Yes, Jimi Hendrix was another one, very similar situation. I met Jimmy, we became friendly, and I asked him if he'd play my school. And the night I asked him if he'd come and play, he pointed to the Animals and he said, "Those guys are taking me back to England tomorrow." They sort of discovered him, but he said he would come play the school when he came back to America, and he did. As soon as he got back to the U.S., he came and played my school. And again, the student body basically didn't know who he was. He wasn't famous. He never record out, or the record was just coming out. And they actually tried to impeach me. I don't remember if they tried to impeach me. I think they tried to impeach me for the Doors. They might have been trying to impeach me for Jimi Hendrix. One or the other. Yeah, but we had everyone great come to play the school, except we didn't have the Beatles, we didn't have Dylan, and we didn't have the Stones. But we had everybody else: The Who, Pink Floyd, the Airplane, the Dead. We just every great band. We had Jimi Hendrix. We had Otis Redding come. Every year we would do something called the Blues Bag, and we'd have every great blues player. We had them all at one point or another, whether it was Muddy Waters or
B.B. King.
B.B. King, of course. And then we would always do one Motown extravaganza every year. That the students love. They love that. Anybody who gets to see the Four Tops or the Temptations, Martha and the Vandellas, everyone.
That's party music. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was the music that we all grew up with at that time.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't stand Pink Floyd, but they loved the Four Tops.
Well, I want to go through your career, because that right there says you were a big part of the kind of the underground scene of the 60s and the psychedelic era, but you're also part of several other eras that followed, like punk and new wave. After you had traveled the world, you came back to America and found that music was getting a little corporate, but you found punk, right?
Well, let me explain that. So the music that I was into personally was what's called hippie music. So the
Flower Power,
Country Joe and the Fish,
yeah,
the Airplane. That was my music. And then in the late 60s, the very end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s. So while I was away overseas, which was about almost 7 years, that all sort of morphed into corporate rock, and that I had no interest in whatsoever. I started listening to Indian music, and that became my music. That's what I listened to every day, was music from Asia, because I was driving through Asia, and although I had my 8-track tape in my van, and I was listening to the music that I used to like, but as far as new music coming out, none of that was something that struck me at the time, and I instead was listening to to lots and lots of Indian and Pakistani music, which I absolutely loved. Anyway, when I did get back to the United States, Patti Smith's album had come out. uh, One of the guys who I knew who had worked with the Doors, a guy named Danny Fields, was managing the Ramones. He talked me into coming to see them at this little club called CBGB's, and I, completely, not that I stopped listening to indie music. I still do to this day, but suddenly I was back into rock, and it was because of the Ramones, because of Patty, who I also met, a close friend of mine, Sandy Pearlman, who was very, very important in my life. He was at Stony Brook. He was a senior when I was a freshman, and he talked me into running for freshman class president, for example. And he got me very much into politics and into music. Anyway, he was good friends with Patty, and he brought me over to meet her. First, we went to see her play it in a basement of a church. This is long before she recorded an album, and I thought she was the greatest thing I ever saw, but it could never be captured on tape. That's what I thought. Of course, I was wrong, and she recorded her recordings, especially those early recordings, were fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I went over to her place above a floor shy on 14th Street in Manhattan, and so I started getting into the newer stuff. I think it was her who turned me on to this band called Television.
Yeah, I
And
love Television.
yeah, and then I was starting to see them when they would play, and then Richard Hell and all these.
Yeah, Blank Generation. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So I was really excited about these bands, and at that time, I moved to the West Coast, and I met a guy named Chris Knab who had a record store, Aquarius Records. We first started a punk rock radio show once a week on KSAN, the big commercial rock station. And
Of course,
then,
they called it progressive, right?
yeah, but not while we were on. We had the nights, and it wasn't progressive. It was punk, and we played. There weren't even enough records for us to fill our slot, so we would play tapes of the local bands, which made it a really popular show because all the local bands and all their friends and family and fans, everybody would listen because they wanted to hear their own band on the biggest radio station in San Francisco, which we played all the time. And then one of the biggest bands in San Francisco was called the Nuns, and they had been contacted by all the different record companies because they would play and there would be lines around the block, and the companies realized that, and they would come out to see them, and they didn't get it.
They were controversial, right? Their song "Decadent Jew" was very controversial.
Yes, that's right, it was.
And even Bill Graham had a problem with it, I guess.
That's right. At one point, Bill Graham said he would manage them if they stopped doing that song, and they said no. I was very proud of them for saying no. Anyway, so they wound up with all these tapes that Elektra and Columbia, now Sony, made for them. And then they said to me, "Why don't because the band couldn't get signed, so they had these tapes, but then never went any further. So they asked me if I wanted to put out a record, and I thought, what do I know about putting out records? I don't have any idea. They said, well, you could figure it out.
Start a label, right?
So we didn't really think about starting a label at first. We just thought we'd put out this one record for them and sell it in Chris's store. That was really the plan. So we did put it out. And then I started sending it to friends of mine around the country who did shows like your show, like your station. And so college stations mostly, but also some of the big progressive stations like KSAN around the rest of the U.S., like WSHE in Fort Lauderdale as one example, or WNEW in New York, WBCN in Boston. They all had these little ghetto shows, just like KSAN did, that we were doing. And I'd send it to all these little ghetto shows, and they all played it because everybody's looking for stuff to play. No one had enough to play to fill up their time. So we got lots of airplay, and then we started selling it not just in Chris's store, but all over the country because the people were hearing it on the radio and they liked it. They liked that song "Decadent Jew," which was on that first 3-song EP, 7-inch 3-song EP. So anyway, that sort of we didn't make any money from this. We lost money, as a matter of fact, but we liked it. We really enjoyed doing it. And then all of the other bands in town started coming to us with their tapes and asking us if we would put them out. And that's when we decided to make a record label out of this whole thing.
415, right?
415 Records, which is the police code for disturbing the peace. So in other words, if a dispatcher gets a call that there's a loud band playing, disturbing the neighborhood, they'll call the patrol car and say, "There's a 415 on the corner of Folsom and 18th." And
so then that led into your influence in the new wave world, right? Because Romeo Void became kind of a big hit once you had a deal with Columbia, right?
Well, before that, we had an underground hit with Romeo Void. Also, we had an underground hit with the Red Rockers. But we had done we did a deal with CBS, Columbia Records, now Sony, and they didn't really make any of our bands any bigger. Unfortunately, they they were too corporate, really, to be working with a label like 415. They put out our records. They helped the bands by giving them tour support and some money, so that was a good thing. But in terms of sales, mostly not. It was probably a mistake for me to do it, but I was pressured by the bands, and I understood the pressure because they would see, for example, a band like X, like Romeo Void and X were good friends, and they started at exactly the same level. But X got a deal, and suddenly, instead of like driving around in a station wagon and sleeping on people's floors, X was staying in hotels and driving around in a big tour bus. Yeah. And Romeo Void, said, "Hey, we want the same kind of thing." So anyway, they sort of got me to sign this deal with Columbia. It was a mistake. It was a bad deal, bad for everybody. Nobody benefited from it.
Well, I think in the 90s, a lot of stations that played alternative found those as golden hits. Like "Never Say Never" came back as a really big classic song.
Right, but "Never Say Never" was pre-Sony. That was a record that we put out on 415. Okay. So "Girl in Trouble" is a temporary.
Yeah, that was
a Columbia hit.
Yeah.
But anyway, it is what it is. It's
Well, Howie, we got about 5 minutes left.
We haven't even started. But anyway,
we got to do more of these. But I want to get to when you were at Sire.
When I sold the company to Sony, I ran for CBS. I ran it for them. I couldn't stand it. I hated it. And then I decided I was just going to go to live in another country again. And I was getting ready to do that. And Seymour Stein, who I knew from the Ramones, asked me if I would come and run Sire for him. And I said yes, so I did. And it was part of Warner Brothers. Then I worked at the Warner Brothers headquarters in Los Angeles. And then when the Reprise, when they wanted to revitalize Reprise had been a label in terms of literally like just a logo really on a record, but they had no personnel. But then they decided they were going to revitalize the whole thing and make it a separate label. And they asked me if I wanted to be president. I said sure, and that's my story. The rest is
history. Bands like Green Day, Depeche Mode was on Sire, Faith No More, B-52s, The Cult, Jesus and Mary Chain, Replacements, other Smiths.
Morrissey, remember?
Morrissey, yeah. So so Sire and Reprise worked together closely, right?
Something like that, yes. Every Sire record was either every Sire artist either went to Warner Brothers or to Reprise. So Depeche Mode and Erasure, for example, stayed with Reprise. Talking Heads, on the other hand, and Ramones stayed with Warner Brothers. So we sort of split the label up between us, and we all worked with Seymour.
And you know all those bands personally, right?
Sure.
So like, yeah, I could name any of them, like Talking Heads, David Byrne.
Yes.
Yeah, and all the B-52s and
Yes.
REM and
Well, yes, I do. And one of the reasons why I maintained a little bit of knowing these people, even all these years after I've retired, is because sometimes I'll do things like, raise money for People for the American Way with an auction. And I'll go and say, can you write out some lyrics for me and sign them so I could auction them off? Or in the case of, what's his name? The bass player from Nirvana. Chris,
yeah, Chris
Chris Novoselic.
Novoselic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I asked him, if he donated something, and he donated the most amazing thing. He has his own plane. He's a pilot, and he agreed that he would take the winner of the auction. Um, he'd pick them up at their airport, take them to another place they wanted to go, and have lunch together, and then fly them back to their original airport. So that was a great prize. But lots and lots of people gave like wonderful prizes like that. A lot of like personal experiences. Other people gave signed guitars, which is the easiest thing. But the personal experiences are what people really love. So
One of the personal experiences I have with Reprise is I got this one day.
Green Day.
Yeah. So I'm just curious. This was to commemorate 9 million units. That was back in '96, I believe. They went on to sell way over 10 million
Right.
units on this.
10 becomes goes beyond platinum to diamond, and they were one of the very first bands to go diamond, and that was because not that other bands didn't sell 10 million, but diamond was invented right at the time that they sold their 10 million. So they were one of the first and only bands originally to get a diamond record, which made me very proud. They were a great band. That's an amazing album.
Are you the one who signed them to Reprise?
No, they were signed before we revitalized Reprise.
Okay.
So they were signed by Michael Austin, Mo Austin's son.
Okay.
And,
Yeah. I knew Mo Austin's other son, Randy.
Yeah, that's right. He was a promotion guy
Yeah.
and a tennis champion.
Yeah.
But so anyway, besides Michael, it was Michael signed them with Rob. Damn, I just had the name on the tip of my tongue. It's gone. Anyway,
Michael signed Madonna, right?
Seymour signed Madonna.
Okay. Now the whole thing was Seymour Stein at Sire. He only wanted to manage Madonna, right, or oversee Madonna, and then he turned everything else to you, like all the new wave stuff.
Something like that. I mean, Seymour. Every artist has what's called a rabbi, the person who's going to advocate for them, the person who's going to oversee their career and stuff. And everybody, when I first got to Sire, Seymour called a meeting and had us all get together in one room and to divide up the bands. And in the end, he said, "You know what? This is after hours of like talking and talking." He said, I'm gonna take Madonna. Howie is gonna no. He said, "I'm gonna take Madonna and the Cult. Howie's gonna take everything else."
Wow.
So that's how that
That's
went.
a long list.
Although an hour later, Seymour said, "You know what? I love the Cult, but you take them too." So he had Madonna and I had everyone else, which was good because Seymour knew I wasn't a Madonna fan, and knew it wouldn't be the right thing for me to be overseeing anything of hers. Although ironically, he forced me later to come to a Madonna concert. I never would have gone to a Madonna concert, and he bribed me. He said he would, give me a bunch of money if I came. He never did give me the money, but I did go to it. And we went backstage before the concert, and it was just it was a very large room and it was very empty. But Madonna was presenting an AIDS charity with a check for something like $1 million. It was all of the money that she made at Madison Square Garden for 2 nights. She was giving it to them, and I was, it never got in the papers. It was not done as a publicity thing. It was just something that she wanted to do, and no one even knew what AIDS was back then. It was, it became very well known afterwards, but she was giving this money because out of her heart, not to get like famous or to get people to think how great she was or anything like that. And I was really impressed, and it really I said to myself, you're a jerk, and you should listen to her music, and you'll find something in it you like. And I did, and I did like it.
Borderline. That's a really good
Well,
song.
no, I didn't like that one, but there were songs that I found that I liked, and that was that made me feel better that she was on my label, because Borderline I could never get into. But,
But she became the best-selling female artist of all time, even to this day, I believe is true.
Wow, I'd be surprised if that is the case. But I was happy that she kept our doors open for many years. At first at Sire, and then at the whole Warner Brothers label. She sold so many records, and she was so successful.
Well, that brings us to the present. I made this chart from Billboard. This is how the pie is divided up these days among the major labels, and Warner has a 16% share. That used to be what didn't Warner used to be the top label?
Oh yes, the whole time that I was lucky enough to be there when Mo Austin was running, Lenny Waronker were running it, and then Russ Styrett, Warner Brothers was the #1 label by far. I mean, no one could come close. But they really went down the toilet.
Because of the AOL-Time-Warner merger in 2000 or 2001, right?
Well, yeah, that was a really big mistake, and that that was a really bad thing. And Warner still stayed on top of the heap for quite a few years after that. But at that point, because of what was going on in the corporation, so not necessarily the record company, but in the corporation that owned the record company, it was doomed to fail. Until eventually, it more or less became a money laundering operation for the Russian mafia, which is what it is now.
Wow. Now, isn't that the reason? Wasn't the merger the reason you left Warner altogether?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it wasn't the merger itself, but I remember, although Steve Case disputes this, I'm going to say that in advance. But the first meeting that we had with him, he called us all together, all the senior executives at the music company, and we all went into this theater on the lot, on the Warner Brothers lot. So not just music, but every division of Warner Brothers and Time Warner. And he, I mean, he started off by saying, "This is going to be our time. We're all going to be rich." And I'm thinking, well, we already are all rich. Everybody is rich. But then he started saying, because it was everyone there was a senior executive, they're all rich. He started saying how, this is the part he disputes, but he said it. Fuck the artists, fuck the employees, fuck everybody. It was like the opposite of what Mo Austin had used to build a great company, which was to always be there to serve the artists, always be there for our employees, always be there for our customers. That's how Mo built Warner's. This guy was tearing it down in the first sentence out of his mouth to his whole staff. And then when we left there to walk back to the record company, I was with Russ Styrett, who was the chairman, and I said, "I'm leaving. I don't want to work here anymore." And he said, "Yeah, I know. I don't either, but you can't leave till I do." So I said, "Okay, I'll stay while you're here." And that was about, I don't know exactly how long, but about another year. And then I just didn't want to work in that kind of a situation. I mean, Mo Austin really fostered the kind of place that I wanted to work at. It was very different from what Sony was. Sony was a really corporate place. It was really horrible, and they hired horrible people. Not 100%, but they weren't looking for great people. They were looking for awful people. Whereas Mo was always
corporate people, right? People. Corporate people who could rig the stock market or whatever.
And Mo wasn't looking for that at all.
Okay. Now, Mo, I understand Mo was the first president of Reprise Records, which was started by Frank Sinatra, right?
That's right. Mo worked for Frank Sinatra, and they started Reprise.
And that was in the early 60s.
Whenever it was, yeah.
Yeah, and so then eventually Mo became like president of Warner Brothers Records, right?
Right. Warner Brothers bought Reprise, and then Mo eventually became the president of the whole Warner Reprise operation.
And then you were vice president under him, right? For Warner Brothers?
Well, at first, Seymour Stein hired me to run as general manager of Sire. I ran Sire, and as the general manager of Sire, I was a vice president of Warner Brothers.
Okay.
And then when Mo left, he asked me if I would come with him to Geffen. And I thought about him and Lenny. I thought about it because I love both of them. I love working for Mo Austin, and I love working for Lenny Waronker. But I felt like if I left, I was leaving all my artists who I had, spent so much energy and time developing, some of whom were going, on the verge of breaking. You always, you put all that energy into working a band for, year after year after year, and then they're going to break. You want to be part of that. But anyway, so it was that. But also, I felt like, did I really want to just leave Seymour in the lurch like that?
Hmm.
So I decided not to. I didn't go with them to Geffen, and I stayed. And then Danny Goldberg came in to run to be the chairman of Warner Brothers, and he asked me if I would like to be the president of Reprise, and I said sure, let's do it. And
wow.
we're still very good friends. I just had dinner with him a couple of nights ago, and yeah,
so he was part of Geffen at the time when Nirvana was blowing up real big, huh?
Well, no, he wasn't part of Geffen. He was Nirvana's manager.
Oh, okay, manager. Okay, yeah, and he wrote a book about it in the past, I guess, decade. Yeah.
Well, he's written a lot of books, but he did one about Nirvana. But he's written 6 or 7 books. One I think he's just about to finish now. Danny's a great guy. He was also the I don't know the title, but he was the chief executive at Air America.
Okay, right, the radio program that had Al Franken.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And
he's another guy, by the way, who also mixes politics and music.
Yeah, right.
Very much into both. And that's why we get along so well. That's part of the reason why we get along so well.
So wrapping it up just with a few more things, I just want to clarify what it says in Wikipedia, which we know isn't always true, but they say that they credit Seymour Stein as coining the term new wave. Do you know that to be true?
I don't know if it is or if it isn't. A lot of times, people will just say something like that and it gets repeated over and over again, and then it becomes true. Sandy Pearlman was probably the first person who is famous to use the word heavy metal. Heavy metal was already a term, but Sandy applied it to music. Was he the very first person to do it? He might have been, but I don't know. Who knows?
What about new wave? When did you start hearing that term? Well, when you were playing music on KSAN in '76, did you call it new wave?
No, I don't think so. I think we called it, it was either punk or alternative. Yeah, maybe new wave as a term was going around. I don't really remember. Seymour, though, sort of popularized the term.
Okay.
He even put out a promotion record, which is called New Wave. If you want, I can get it and put it on the screen so you can see it.
Yeah, if you want to do that real quick.
Sure. It's very close.
Yeah, I think I remember the series of CDs of New Wave.
That's different. That was a different one. That was the Just Say Yes. But this was before I really got there. This is a 7-inch, two 7-inches.
Okay.
Promoting Talking Heads, an unknown band. Dead Boys. All of these bands were unknown at the time. Dead Boys, the Saints, the Ramones. No, Richard Hell. Oh yeah.
Real quickly about the Ramones. I met Joey once in '96, kind of on their farewell tour, and he told me, we talked, I swear, for a half hour straight about just the Beatles, and that's all we talked about, because that's both of our favorite bands, and I just wondered. You had said in a recent interview with Nicole Sandler, or it was either her or another one, but that Ramones didn't really make a lot of money, even though I thought they had a commercial punk sound, like a power pop sound. But why do you suppose that was? That they had so many hooky songs, but they didn't sell that many records?
Right. I mean, they have since, but while they were going, they,
Okay, yeah.
you know, they became very much bigger in other countries than they were in the U.S. So in other words, they would go to Latin America and they would play these stadiums that held 10 and 20,000 people, whereas in the U.S. they were still playing. Well, they were had graduated from clubs and they were really playing theaters, but not big stadiums. But and then in Europe they were huge as well. So towards the end of their career, they were sort of getting there, but they never really had. If I have their first gold record, which was something that we put out, so it would go gold, which was the Ramones' greatest hits, and
Okay.
all those great albums that they put out, none of them really.
That Yellow Double album, was that the one that went gold or platinum? That
Uh,
got
I don't know. I don't think so,
it
but I'm
had
not
Rock and
sure.
Roll High School, it had all their hits, like I Want to Be Sedated.
Yeah, well, I don't remember it being a double record, but it might have been.
Okay, I might be out of my mind. I don't know. But another question I have, this is kind of to wrap it up, and it brings the whole thing back to where we started, I think, is music, art. Well, let's see, I have a quote here from UMG CEO Lucian Grange. He's the current CEO and was CEO back in September 2012, when New Yorker published this quote from him: "We're not in the art business." And that was in the context of bringing aboard someone to help them pick more commercial songs, I guess. But do you stand with that statement? We're not in the art business. Is that what a label
That's
CEO?
why Warner Brothers was number one because we were in the art business.
Okay.
But it's funny that you should bring that up because I remember sitting around in. I think we were in Joey Ramone's living room, and it was me and Joey and Johnny, and they were asking me a similar question to what you just said. Why aren't we selling more records? And they were frustrated about it. And I remember Johnny saying, "We don't want to be an art band. We don't want to be like a foreign film. We want to be like Gone with the Wind. We want to be gigantic."
A blockbuster.
Yeah. So I mean, and we tried various things to make that happen, and nothing worked. They were making great music, but it just where they were just too ahead of their time.
Yeah. I think Joey Ramone's cover of What a Wonderful World, that's one of the best recordings I've ever heard in my life. That came out after he passed away.
Yeah, and then you named some of their greatest hits like Rock and Roll High School and
Yeah.
I Want to Be Sedated. I mean,
Yeah.
why weren't they hits? It
Right.
didn't make any sense to me why those songs weren't
Well,
hits.
they became hits once you had a lot of alternative stations in the 90s, I think.
Right, but that was still they weren't pop mainstream hits
Yeah.
that sold millions of records. So
Right.
that's why they weren't selling millions of records. But they everyone knew them. People, but there was a time when people were buying more Ramones T-shirts than they were Ramones albums.
Yeah. Well, that's rock and roll. Well,
Yes.
Howie, it's been great talking with you. Anything you want to add to what we've talked about?
No, I am very frustrated because I woke up this morning and I was shaving my head and I finished this half and this half I didn't. So I have like my peach fuzz here, and I'm completely shaved here. So I'm very frustrated about it. And I want to get back and see if the the head shaver is charged now.
Well, good luck with that, and good luck with your blog, downwithtyranny.com.
Thanks. I write every now and then. I write about music on there. Also, I'm in the midst of writing a memoir, and when I think something is somewhat interesting, I'll put up a page on my blog so people can read that. So it's not 100% political. It's mostly a political blog, though. I write about a lot about Trump.
Yeah. Oh, one more quick thing. You mentioned
Sure.
you had met President Clinton in the past. Have you met other presidents as well?
Never met Obama. Who else is there? Oh, Biden, never met him. Never wanted to. No, I think. Oh, well, let's see. Yes. When I was a kid, I met JFK.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I was very, I didn't even
That's a
understand.
movie right there.
It was an interesting thing. A police horse stepped on me, and they brought me inside this place. He was having a rally outside, but outside of Dubrow's, which is, if you're from Brooklyn, you'd know Dubrow's. And they brought me inside, and President Kennedy came over to me and rubbed my foot. Yeah, and my mother was like freaked out that the president. Well, he wasn't president then.
Okay.
He was running for
Okay.
president, but became president soon after. Anyway, so I met him before he became president, and no one else. The only one that I ever spent real time speaking with was President Clinton, and I spent a
Oh,
lot of time speaking with him several
all right.
times. So met him at fundraisers. I met he did a big banquet and asked. Oh, it's a long story, but so I won't go into the whole thing. But eventually, I brought Lou Reed to play at this banquet, and so I got to meet him then. And there's this kind of famous scene that was captured, although not the audio. It was captured by NPR or PBS, of me telling him that it's okay for the president of a company to get a blowjob, or a president to get a blowjob. And he broke up. He was laughing really hysterically, and that's why it became a famous scene. And then Hillary sort of, I don't think this was in the pictures, but she sort of knew that I had said something untoward, and she gave me a really dirty look, not knowing what I had said, but
All right.
figuring what it was.
Well, Howie, there's so many other things we could talk about. I hope we can again someday. And it's been great talking with you.
Thank you. I'll talk to you another time.
You got it. See you later, Howie.
Bye-bye.
Social music.